Good evening. Welcome to the October 14th School Board Work Session. The time is now 5:30 p.m. The school board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission as a community, we create supportive learning environments where all students thrive. Ms. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess,
Here.
Miss Carol Hubbard,
Here.
Mr. Dorn,
Here.
Miss Julian is on Zoom.
Yep, here.
Thank you. Miss Maple
Here.
and Mrs. Burnett.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is our presentation by administration. Assistant Superintendent Sarah Gillum and Chief Operations Officer Andy DeGraw will present the district administration's overview of the Pearl Creek STEAM Charter application, including potential impacts for the district. I will turn it over to you guys.
Thank you so much, President Burnett and board, for having us here tonight. Our intent is to have questions at the end. However, I know if there is something that happens, please try to gain President Burnett's attention, and we can certainly pause and do it in that moment as well. Well, okay, good. Okay. I was like, well, that's great. It's not going. We wanted to review just quickly for you what our goals were in the presentation tonight. Our goal is to review the charter application from an administrative perspective. We know that you all have reviewed the charter before, have had it. The APC reviewed it last week. But from that review, we just wanted to share some key observations and considerations for your discussion. And then we also wanted to identify if there were any legal or procedural concerns that we saw within the application. And then at the end, we'll also highlight some potential district-wide impacts on enrollment, staffing, and resources. I'm like, why is the computer so far away? Section 1 of the charter application is about establishment of a charter at the local level. In the charter application, there were two different expansion options that were provided. I believe it's on page 5 of the application. Option 1 was a expansion that took the charter from 352 students in the first year and expanded to grades 7 and 8 in future years. It is kind of a rotation in that expansion plan of having between 2 and 3 different classrooms at each grade level. So the enrollment is variable throughout those years. But the goal would be in 2034, 2035, in the initial plan that they gave us, it would have a target enrollment of about 498 students. Option 2, which for the purposes of our analysis tonight, as it was the option that was most discussed by the APC last week, is to have 3 classrooms per grade level in grades K through 8. So that would take the initial enrollment of 352 students up to approximately 468 students, an increase of 122 students by school year 2031 to 2032. One thing that we will note here is that the target PTR in grades 4 through 6 does exceed the Alaska State Statute target class size of 23. There is no administrative regulations on that state statute that came out last year, but we just wanted to note that in our presentation. We'll come to it one other time. Another thing that we wanted to note in this section, there are, as you may be familiar with, there's also appendices in the application that typically relate to specific different sections of the application. So one appendix related to section 1 is the contract. The APC did use our template contract from the district that we provided for them. So we did want to note that one part of the contract as well as one part of the application is identifying staff. So there are specific staff that are listed in the contract. However, we just wanted to make note that the charter schools do have to follow our district hiring practices. So they have to follow our practices and our collective bargaining agreements for both FEA and ESSA. So while there are names of staff members who have shared some intent that they would be interested in working at the charter school, those names would not become finalized until they went through the official application and hiring process. So just for our section 1, at the end of each section, we will have a summary of the considerations that we went through in that section, just for you to have available. So for section 1, we just wanted to note that there are 2 different expansion plans, which do provide some uncertainty in terms of what the actual growth of the charter school would look like over time. There is the grades 4 through 6 exceed the state's target class size. And also just noting that the charter does have to align their hiring procedures with negotiated agreements in our district hiring practices. Section 2 of the application is about organization and administration. It includes their APC. It also includes Appendix E, which is called the Administrative Policy Manual. I will also note that many of the points that we may bring up tonight were also brought up last week by the board during the APC's presentation. So we'll just highlight them again. We won't go over them in detail, but just do want to note that some of those pieces were in there. For example, in this first bullet here, the Administrative Policy Manual, which is Appendix E, is also referred to in the application as both the parent handbook and the student handbook, so it is referenced inconsistently. The APC did note that they do intend that to refer to the same document. The reason that it is important to us to know specifically what they're referring to is that one of their pieces of their admission policy is that parents have to sign that handbook. They have to agree to the contents of the handbook. So in terms of our review, we just want to make sure that we're fully aware of what parents are agreeing to when they're signing the handbook. So we just want to make sure that we have clarification. One thing that we do note in that handbook is while volunteer hours are referenced at kind of 3 different places throughout the application. So in the handbook, which is page 104, there's a general statement about Pearl Creek's volunteers assisting with clerical work, tutoring, instruction, and presentations, and then goes into persons interested in volunteering should contact the office or classroom teacher, that they have to sign in, and how helpful volunteers are. In their admissions part, which I believe is section 6, page 32, that refers to all parents or guardians who enroll students in Pearl Creek STEAM Charter will be required to review and agree to the student handbook as well as to contribute volunteer hours to support the day-to-day operations of Pearl Creek STEAM Charter. They do also go on to say that flexible volunteer hours will be offered in the event a family is unable to volunteer. A volunteer bank will be established. Families who are able to volunteer excess hours can donate to the volunteer bank for others to draw from if necessary. And organizations who donate time will have their hours donated to the volunteer bank as well. So that information is different than what's in the policy manual that parents have to agree to. So that would be a piece that we would just need clarity on of what will be in the handbook that parents are signing. The other place that they do reference volunteer hours is in their educational part, section 3, that their goal will be that 70% of families will volunteer. I believe the APC referenced in their presentation maybe a target of 20 volunteer hours per family. However, I was unable to find that specific number anywhere in the application, so we would also just want to have clarity on that piece as well. Also in the administrative policy manual, we just wanted to note that in the, again, section 6, Appendix G, they reference recommending attending an orientation meeting, but there's no additional detail regarding that also in the administrative policy manual. One other note to have in the contract is that we do have a place in there where the charter school has requested waivers. So that's, again, another part of the contract. You know, in our board policy 935.2, it does reference that we can have some negotiations as we're working on the contract. So I just want to make note that this would be an area that we would need to explore further. The policies that the APC is requesting waivers from are listed in the contract. However, there isn't a justification listed for each of them. And as we've also been going through the AASB shift in policies, many of the policies listed are either archived policies, so they're no longer active policies, or they're a section header, so they refer to an entire section of policies, so it's unclear. There's no content in that specific section header, and it's also not clear which policies under that section they would be specifically requesting waivers to. So we just want to make note that that would be a piece where we would need some further review before we move forward with accepting all of those waivers. However, there are no collective bargaining waivers that they were requested, so we just wanted to note that there's none of those in there. So to summarize our section 2 considerations, just noting that there are inconsistent references between the administrative policy manual, the parent handbook, and the student handbook. There is a lack of clarity about the specifics regarding the admission process and then also the volunteering part in the handbook that parents would be required to approve. Those requested waivers are not justified, only listed, so we would need to review those further as well before we approved. Section 3 of the application is related to the instructional program, so that's where their curriculum pieces are included. That's also where special education is included in the application. So I believe this was also brought up at the board work session last week, and we also did when we met with the APC in July, shared the specific contract language around special education that the board approved last year and included in the contract, and we had a discussion around what special education in charter schools may look like. So we did note that there is only one special education teacher in their current budget for 352 students in K-6. I believe a board member noted that that would be a fairly high case management load, up to perhaps 70 students if they were to have an average special education population like our other schools. Ms. Hall noted that a comparable school could be Barnett, which has about 400 students. They do have 2 resource special education teachers and 1 paraprofessional. Barnett also has no district-wide programs and no pre-K program as well. In the budget, there is space allotted for 5 ESSA tutors or teacher's assistants, and so I know that we had, it's not specifically budgeted for paraprofessionals. However, those 5 positions could be paraprofessionals if they were to have that in their budget. One other thing we wanted to note is that Pearl Creek STEAM Charter would not serve as a district-wide program placement for students requiring specialized settings. So for our students who required an extended resource or perhaps an intensive resource program, the district would not identify Pearl Creek as their program placement. However, one thing we want to note is that the language in their application, Pearl Creek is committed to providing an inclusive learning environment and will admit students with special needs. This is from page 32. In compliance with state and federal regulations, students with individualized education programs or 504 plans will be accommodated as necessary. We want to note that we would request that they provided some consistency in terms of how they would handle students who applied, where the student's least restrictive environment would not be Pearl Creek. So for example, if we had an intensive resource student who we identified their least restrictive environment to be a district-wide program, Pearl Creek would not be identified as that least restrictive environment. However, we can't stop them from applying to a school of choice. So we would just want to have clarity around how they would handle such applications. Oh, I just realized I don't have a summary slide for that one because it was only one slide. Okay, next section is section 5, which is the facility. So the current facility identified in the charter application is the former Pearl Creek Elementary School building. This building is set to be returned to the Fairbanks North Star Borough from the district on December 1st. So the lease agreement would be anticipated to be between Pearl Creek Stream Charter School and the Fairbanks North Star Borough. At the time of the application, we do not have a specific lease agreement, so it is based heavily on assumptions. The assumption is a lease cost of $271,250, and that was, they said, based on utility and maintenance projections. We do want to note that, because the APC did bring up that that would be a public lease, we also just want to note that charters with much smaller buildings and enrollment pay between $360,000 and $450,000. So that includes lease, utilities. I want to make sure you know, utilities, we include internet, phone, garbage, water, sewer, electricity, heating, fuel, natural gas, and copier charges. We all consider to be a part of those utility charges when we're estimating. So we just want to note that that does seem to be a much smaller estimate than what other charter schools are paying. Per the APC presentation, I also heard that they said that they believed that custodial costs would be covered through the lease with the borough. So that's just one note that we want to make, that if that is going to be covered through that lease, that's not a standard practice. So a standard practice would not be to include additional supplemental services as a part of the lease. Next, regarding maintenance and operations, in the APC budget, there was $30,000 that was budgeted for both indoor and outdoor maintenance. When the Pearl Creek Elementary School was a part of our district, the 3-year average annual cost based on work orders for maintenance was approximately $55,000. The position that was budgeted for $30,000 was described as a maintenance worker, could be part-time, full-time, or contracted based on cost and need. They also noted in their APC presentation that now the Fairbanks North Star Borough, taking ownership back of the building, would be responsible for any major repairs and capital improvement under the borough's CIP. So it would no longer be one of the district CIP projects. It would shift to the borough to be a CIP project with that. We just want to make note that as we went through the school closure process last year, we certainly took a lot of factors into consideration, and one of those was building maintenance. And so the last estimated 6-year capital improvement cost for the Pearl Creek building was approximately it says the exact number, $43,734,533. So we just wanted to make note of that estimate as well. So for section 5, again, we just want to note there is no draft lease for the anticipated building. The APC did note that they were exploring perhaps other buildings as well, but there was no information included on what those buildings may be or what the potential lease costs would be. It is a relatively small amount budgeted for maintenance based upon the size of the building and the estimated costs that we have had in previous years. Custodial costs were assumed to be included in the lease. There was also perhaps the APC noted that perhaps staff would also pick up some of those custodial duties as well, so that could be a part of the cost sharing there as well. And again, the capital repairs would now be handled by the borough, not the district. So it's just, we want to make note that those financial and operational responsibilities are based on a lot of assumptions, and in terms of building the overall budget for the school, it is not a clear path forward. Section 6 also is.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Miss Julian's on, and she has a question about 5. Do we wait until the end, or are we going to interrupt?
We're waiting till the end. Miss
Okay.
Julian, we're going to wait till the end for questions. If you have some, I know Mr. DeGraw is going to pause for a couple of his slides, but for the rest of this, we're going to do questions at the end.
Okay.
Please continue, Ms. Gillum.
Thank you, President Burnett. So Section 6 and Appendix G provide the admissions language. So that includes an orientation meeting, the Pearl Creek STEAM Charter application, which is not a specific attachment to the application packet itself, and then the requirement to review and sign the student handbook, which we've established is also the parent handbook or the administrative policy manual. There are references in the admission to contribute volunteer hours and a volunteer bank for donated excess hours from families and organizations. And then they note that they would be using volunteer hours to support the day-to-day operations. We do want to make note, again, there is current litigation in Alaska in the Mat-Su that does raise legal concerns over requiring volunteer hours as a condition of admission or enrollment. Their application does reference families that may not have the ability to provide volunteer hours, and then also speaks to the volunteer bank as well. So it does seem like they have some provisions for if a family isn't able to do that. They're not spelled out in a lot of detail, but it is referenced in there. But we did want to bring to the board's attention that there is current litigation in the Mat-Su regarding charter schools and a requirement of volunteer hours specifically. The next topic in the application refers to the lottery, which is a part of the admissions process. So their admissions process does include a lottery, a weighted lottery or a preferential lottery. And so the proposed preference categories that they have in their application are children of staff, which is also part of our FEA and ESSA collective bargaining agreements, children or grandchildren of founding members, the school year 24-25 boundary preference for students who were enrolled at Pearl Creek Elementary School that school year, siblings of existing students, and then Title I and migrant ed students. And then the 6th category would be all other eligible applicants. So we want to note specifically that we are going to discuss that there are some of these categories that do raise potential legal concerns. There are also certainly the children of staff is a historical and part of our collective bargaining agreements that we have in place. Sibling preference is something that we have have as part of our out of attendance area application. So those are two areas that we don't have any concerns with. We also have provided some preference for children of founding members before, but the grandchildren specifically we will talk about. The first slide that I have on this one relates to what the Alaska state statute says regarding a lottery. So this is just some language from Section B of Alaska Statute 1403-265 regarding admission. A charter school shall enroll all eligible students who submit a timely application unless the number of those applications exceeds the capacity of the program, class, grade level, or building. And then in the event of an excess of those applications, the charter school and the local school board shall attempt to accommodate all of the applicants by considering providing additional classroom space and assigning additional teachers from the district to the charter school. If it is not possible to accommodate all eligible students who submit a timely application, students shall be accepted by random drawing. A school board may not require a student to attend a charter school, and I do also want to note that our collective bargaining agreements do not allow us to assign a teacher to a charter school without them against their will, if you will. So also provided to you today, because the APC did reference it in both their presentation and then their email to you, we did also provide for you the federal non-regulatory guidance related to charter school programs. So it was an additional document that you should have received today. Specifically, this guidance is from 2014, I believe, is when this particular one was updated. And it really speaks to specifically lottery pieces. Now, this was referenced by the APC because it does provide specific guidance around weighted lotteries if charter schools are applying for federal funds through the charter school program. So it does certainly provide some guidance for charter schools. However, it does also note in its guidance deferring to state statute as well. So that's why I wanted to make sure I acknowledged what our state statute says regarding a random drawing, and then also what's in the federal non-regulatory guidance around the lottery. So they reference in there certainly weighted lotteries. Our concern is going to be that if more students apply than could attend, admission would not be by random drawing, as is defined in Alaska state statute. There would be preference given to several groups that would potentially be a significant portion of the school population. So the first one, and I will reference page numbers in here if you have the federal, which I realize probably not everybody has, the federal non-regulatory guidance in front of you. But for example, grandchildren, page 17, it specifically speaks to, and now I'm gonna make sure that I actually am referencing the right pages now. I believe, well, okay, hold on. Give me just a second here. I'm wrong, page 19. Okay, so on page 19, it does speak to children of a charter school's founders, so long as the total number of students allowed under this exemption constitutes only a small percentage of the school's total enrollment. So we want to note that the preferences that are described in their application are not structured so much as a weighted lottery as tiered preferential admissions. So that is our concern and how it reads right now. So grandchildren of founding members is not a part of the federal guidance, and it's not a part of state statute. So that's one area that we just wanted to identify that is a concern from us. The next one, which is a bit has two different kind of layers of it. So the next one that we have pause on is the school year 24-25 Pearl Creek Elementary School boundary preference. So there are two different things that seem to be referenced interchangeably that we just want to note in the application, speak to both considering the first note, if you're in section, I think it would be, my apologies that I don't have that page number. It's Appendix H. So in the admissions criteria, it says all students who have previously been enrolled at Pearl Creek STEAM Charter are automatically re-enrolled in the program. Parents or guardians are expected to notify the school of any change of enrollment. And Creek Steam Charter will then give preference to applicants based on the following categories. The order of preference reflecting the school's commitment to its community and stakeholders. So the first one is the children of teachers and staff. The second one is children of founding members, and that's where they speak to both children or grandchildren of founding members. Then it says number 3, returning students. And so previously up above, they talk about that students have to notify them. But then for number 3, it says returning students for purposes of the first operational year only, students who attended Pearl Creek Elementary School in 2024-2025 will be treated as returning students of Pearl Creek STEAM Charter and will be granted priority admission if they are eligible and apply. So in the federal non-regulatory guidance, it speaks to a few areas where students are exempt from the lottery, if you will. So this is on page, and please, Dr. Meinert, if you need to interrupt me, please feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so this is on page 18, at the bottom of 18, and it speaks specifically to a charter school opening the year after it's closed. So it speaks specifically, it says, a charter school may exempt from the lottery only those students who are deemed to have been admitted to the charter school already and therefore do not need to reapply. Specifically, the following categories of applicants may be exempted from the lottery on this basis. Students who are enrolled in a public school at the time it is converted into a public charter school. Students who are eligible to attend and are living in the attendance area of a public school at the time it is converted into a public charter school. The reason I bring this up is because Pearl Creek is not a school this year, and so if it were to open as a charter school next year, it would not fall under those categories of a school that is transitioning into a charter school. So in terms of it being a school open right now and then grandfathering those students in, we have some questions about that, the validity of that connection that's being drawn there. The second thing I want to note is that in the federal non-regulatory guidance, it speaks to treating those students as not having to be a part of the lottery. So also in that group, it does speak to children of the founders and then children of staff. So in terms of the categories, we would be looking at those first 3 categories wouldn't actually be a part of the lottery. They would just be automatically enrolled in the school if they applied. So there's some pause that we have in looking at that specific language around the boundary of Pearl Creek Elementary School, both because it is not currently a school that would be transitioning into a charter school, and it would be a significant number of students that would be automatically enrolled. The next one I want to talk about is in their application, they talked about Title I and migrant education students. So in the email that the APC provided to the board today, they did provide some, they expounded a little bit more on what they meant by Title I serve students. I just want to note that our Title I services are school-based programs. So if a student is enrolled in a Title I school, they receive services regardless of whether they individually qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so all students at a Title I school receive services. And in the email that was provided today, they spoke to both students who were eligible to enroll in a Title I school, students who in the previous year received Title I services, and then also students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So we have some questions and concerns about we don't have students aren't identified as Title I. There's no indicator in PowerSchool that would identify them as Title I. So just in terms of having clarity around what that means would be important. Migrant Ed, specifically both the Title I and the Migrant Ed categories are on pages 16 to 17 in the federal regulatory guidance, non-regulatory guidance. So it speaks to at the bottom of page 16, it says, second, a charter school may weight its lottery to give a slightly better chance for admission to students seeking to change schools under the public schools choice provision. And then it goes on to say, it speaks to the different groups that could be included in that. So it talks about students who may receive economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, migrant students, limited English proficient students, neglected or delinquent students, and homeless students. So it lists multiple groups that could be considered a part of that. However, the other thing we just want to make note of is well, I think that's actually in the next. Was there anything else, Dr. Minor, you wanted to speak to on that one? The next one, I just, to speak to that a little bit, the classification of students being eligible for free and reduced lunch is a highly confidential piece of information. That's not information that our school staff receive. It's really confidential among nutrition services. So I want to talk about a couple things regarding the lottery administration that also just we want to bring to your attention, which I think were also brought up last week. So the proposed process is overseen by the Academic Policy Committee. I want to note that we would want the process to be overseen by school employees as well, by district employees as well, not just the APC. They note that it could be conducted manually or electronically at the APC's discretion. And we want to note that our district lottery system is electronic, but it would be very difficult and labor intensive to have our lottery system include all of the different preferences that they are referencing in their application. And again, because it is confidential information, we would want to make sure that there were school staff, there were district staff that were able to oversee that process as well. That was a very long section. So section 6, summary of considerations. One, just noting that the volunteer hours contribution and handbook approval raise potential legal concerns just based on current open litigation. We also would want to make sure that it's very clear in the handbook of what those volunteer hours contributions are. The preference categories that are currently in the application regarding grandchildren of founders, the boundary preference may violate statutory limits. The lottery process differs from our district standard, and it would not be possible in our current online system to support their proposed parameters. And we would again be looking at significant revisions needing to this. I do also want to note that we did share some of these concerns with them in February when we did meet with the APC. So certainly we have had continued dialogue around this area. And the next section, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. DeGraw to talk about section 7, which is the fiscal section.
Alrighty, thank you, Ms. Gillum. Before I jump into the slides in the fiscal area, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Over the last several months, there have been a lot of things stated publicly, a lot of opinions put out there. There haven't been any shortage really at different venues and whatnot. The vast and comments and opinions specifically on what the financial impacts of a new charter school would be on the school district. The vast majority of those opinions that I heard stated publicly range anywhere from somewhat inaccurate to extremely inaccurate to flat out false to completely false. Statements claiming that the establishment of a new charter actually makes money for the school district are false. Statements claiming that establishing a new charter is cost neutral or does not cost the district anything are false. In our current circumstances, there are significant costs associated with standing up a new charter school, and tonight we're going to go over those different costs. The numbers are not subjective in nature. It's not a situation to where if we look at them differently or if we have a different perspective or if we crunch the numbers differently, they're going to materially change. The numbers aren't nuanced. They are what they are, and they're objective in nature. When we make basic assumptions in 2 or 3 key areas, we are able, and we're going to look at these different assumptions here in a few minutes in the slides. When we make good, solid assumptions in those 2 or 3 key areas, we're able to make extremely accurate estimates on what the cost will be. And again, we'll go over those. One example, and stick with me, I'm not going to digress for a long time, but just stick with me. One example of this are the savings that are generated from school closures. And those savings are to this day still disputed by folks in the community. However, unfortunately, we've now closed 7 schools in the last 4 years. Unfortunately, we've done it a lot, and therefore we know exactly what the cost drivers are, the fixed costs that we are able to eliminate in our budget that saves the district money. So because we've done it many times, unfortunately, we know exactly what cost drivers we can reduce, thus resulting in reductions in expenditures for the school district. The same exact concept applies to standing up a charter in reverse as far as cost increases are concerned. In our district, we've stood up 6 charters in the past roughly 30 years, 6. Today we have 5. And 2 of those we've stood up in the last 7 years. I have personally been involved in the standing up of those 2 charters, Boreal Sun and Discovery Peak. And so I've been able to monitor and watch the cost increases to the school district, and we know exactly what the revenue drivers are and what the cost drivers are of standing up a new charter. And so just want to make that clear that unfortunately, not unfortunately as far as standing up charters, but we've done this before, and so we can make very good estimates and accurate projections on what those impacts will be. Wrong. So starting here with this slide, we're looking at the methodology, the basic high-level methodology that we use when we're making the projections, the estimates. We have 2 scenarios. Scenario A, without the charter in existence, that's status quo, that's right now. We have 28 total schools, approximately 11,250 students. We can easily estimate eventually, not now, but we can estimate our revenues and our expenditures. Then we take the scenario B, which is standing up the charter, and we do the exact same thing. So we have 1 more school with the same number of students. I know there's been contention that additional students would arrive at the district, and I have a slide coming up that will look at that possibility. But with the same number of students, standing up another school, we go back and we relook at what would the estimated revenues be and what would the estimated expenditures be, and compare those 2 scenarios. Hopefully that makes sense. We're comparing scenario A without the charter and scenario B with the charter. This is it's hard to read, but you have this sheet in your packet. Board members have it available to you for review. This is an actual charter funding allocation sheet. So this is the revenue that the district provides to a charter school each year. And I'm going to go over, rather than going over it line by line, the actual sheet, you're free to do that during this meeting, after the meeting, and ask questions and whatnot. What we've done is summarized this revenue, this allocation funding sheet on the next couple of slides. So this slide, again, is a summary of the, I can go back. And again, we have copies of these sheets, the actual sheet, in the board packet, and we have provided this sheet to the charter group as well. So here we start at the top line with an assumption of 352 students. That's the number, that's the enrollment the charter has identified as their target enrollment. The next line down is applying those 352 students to the school size adjustment factor. It's a complicated formula that all of our schools are multiplied by, the enrollment within all of our schools district-wide. This is basically a mirror of the state foundation formula. That 352 is multiplied by the school size adjustment to 425.04. Then the district cost factor, that's our regional cost of living factor, it's 7%. Here, it's basically a cost of living adjustment. The comparison, the baseline is Anchorage. And it goes from 425 to 454.79. Then the special education factor is 20% to bring it to 545.75. That's the adjusted ADM or AADM, 545.75. That number is multiplied by the base student allocation of 6,660 for a total of $3,634,695. We also provide a portion of the local contribution. We provide 100% of the minimum required local contribution, prorated amount for the number of students. And then of the amount beyond, the amount from the minimum required to what is actually provided, and that's about, the difference there is about $23 million. The required local is $40 million, the minimum, and what we were funded was just shy of $63 million. So of that $23 million beyond the minimum, we give charters half of their prorated amount, and that comes to $275,900. The 4% fixed cost deduction that districts are allowed to make per state statute is then subtracted, 138,600 roughly, for a total charter allocation of $3,780,729. This next slide is the main assumptions that we make in order to come to this number. And just so you know, this is the main cost driver for the district when standing up a charter. We have to write a check every year for a charter school of 352 students with these assumptions for $3.8 million. That's a direct cost to the school district. The district is providing the revenue to the charter. The assumptions that we have listed are current enrollment, and then the two middle assumptions are the biggies. Those are the ones that really can move the needle on that number, up or down. 352 in enrollment is a big driver, and then the base student allocation is also a big driver. And then the local contribution also impacts the total amount to a lesser degree. The total district enrollment and the local contribution amounts move the needle less than those two middle ones. I wanted to pause here. This is a detail that has been missed by, back to the inaccurate statements and no shortage of opinions. This detail, large detail, is missed on the general public. I want to make sure the board understands what I've just gone through and understands the concept that the school district provides the revenue and income for the charter, and it comes straight out of our general fund pocket, $3.8 million. So when we're looking at scenario A and scenario B, basically the same number of students, we're literally adding another school to our cost driver at $3.8 million. We'll talk about the possibility of additional enrollment students here in a minute, but basically the same numbers. Any questions on this point?
Ms. Julian, do you have a question?
I do. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. DeGraw, for going over this. And I think that one of the things that I keep going back to is that you mentioned earlier tonight that the target enrollment from the APC is 352. However, the thing that, and I know that you're going to go into this a little bit later, but I'm not sure if you can speak to it right now. The grade bands that the charter has put forward require us to make an increase investment to the charter school over the next 5 years to expand their student seats to almost 470, so 352 to 470. And when you consider the growth to 470, what does that look like from an investment standpoint and also a revenue standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ms. Julian. I have those numbers on a subsequent slide here. Just a minute, we'll be going over that information. Is that okay to go over it at that point?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I
Ye-
just want to be clear that we're talking about, you mentioned target enrollment.
Yeah.
However, I do not see that the target enrollment is 352. The target enrollment is closer to 470.
468, and I'll have it, the required allocation to the charter goes up by about $1 million. So to a short answer to your question, yeah, it's an additional $1 million bill to the school district based on that 468 number. And we'll go over details of that here in a minute.
Thank you, Ms. Julian. Anything further at this moment from the board? Seeing none, before I hand it back over, I want to take a second to recognize Representative Prox, who is here in our audience. So thank you, Representative, for being here. Back to you, Mr. DeGraw.
Alrighty. So that's a cost increase to the district. At the same time, we take a step back and we look at, well, if we're standing up a new school, a new charter school, what areas might our expenditures decline? Okay, so we have a significant number of students migrating from neighborhood schools over to the new charter school. What areas might our cost decline? Do we have any building related savings, utilities or custodial needs or maintenance needs? No. The building needs remain. So let's say 75 students leave one elementary. Do our building costs go down? No, they don't go down at all. We still have the same square footage to maintain. Are we able to reduce principal costs in that building? No. Are we able to reduce the counselor? No. The librarian? No. The gym teacher? No. Those are, the point I'm making is the vast majority of the positions in our buildings are fixed in nature, meaning fluctuation in students do not generally impact the expenditures, the required investment that we need to make in a building. The one area that is variable in nature are classroom teachers. Classroom teachers follow the students. Hopefully that makes sense. So the district will see in that one area cost savings that will offset that $3.8 million allocation bill. And this slide details out the assumptions that we make here. And again, this is based on the two prior charters. We know what's going to happen almost before it happens. And we do, because we've seen it before. We've seen the exact same scenarios play out each time a new charter gets stood up. So the standard thing to do would be to take the total number of students, we're talking classroom teacher savings. It would be logical to say, well, 352 projected enrollment, divide that by our elementary PTR of 26, right? And we come up with, we're gonna save 13 and a half teachers. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. There are situations where what'll happen is a new Pearl Creek charter would attract students from all over the district. District-wide, there'll be students from North Pole E that will go to the new Pearl Creek charter. At Discovery Peak, Wood River area students go to Discovery Peak Charter School. So from all over the district, students would come. When a school has, let's say, 12 kids successfully move to Pearl Creek from North Pole E, for example, we're basically unable to reduce a teacher there because it's across, not only is it one school and it's only 12 kids, that's spread out across 6 grades as well, right? So they come from kindergarten through 5th grade. Literally one kid is coming out of 12 different classes or sections. And so the district is unable to reduce a teacher. And you get that 5, 6, 7, all of a sudden you have 100 kids from areas in the district and you aren't able to reduce any. As opposed to where you are able to reduce the teachers are, we know students would come from U Park and Wood River and Ann Ween. Those were the 2 main schools that received those kids. And there we would be able to reduce a certain number of teachers. But the way it comes out in the wash is anywhere from 50 to 60% of that 13.5 number with the quick top line math. 50 to 60% of those teachers are able to be saved by the district. So 13 and a half, we estimated high. We're saying we're gonna save 60%. 13.5 times 0.6 is 8.1. We anticipate we would save 8 classroom teachers times the average teacher salary of $126,865 for a total of $1,014,920. And so then this expenditure summary slide has both the charter allocation, the main cost to the school district, $3.8 million, less that $1 million estimated classroom teacher savings for a total fiscal impact on the expenditure side of $2.765 million. Any questions? And then we'll move to revenue. All right, moving on to revenue. So when a new school is added to the state foundation funding model, additional revenues are generated. And it's because of the school size multiplier. Won't go into the details of how it happens, just suffice it to say that it happens. The first line here in this slide articulates the amount we've estimated a new Pearl Creek charter would generate in the state foundation funding formula, $846,153, okay? So that's an additional savings that historically will offset, with the increased revenue, would offset any higher costs, right? The problem with that here in the short term is we just this year closed Pearl Creek Elementary, and so we are benefiting from the hold harmless clause. What that means is our funding formula is working as if Pearl Creek Elementary still exists. We're still benefiting from Pearl Creek Elementary still sitting in our foundation formula. So the funding, the hold harmless clause lasts for 5 years, actually for 4, and the step down is articulated there in the slide. You see it, year 1 and 2 are 100% held harmless. So it's as if Pearl Creek was not closed from a revenue perspective. We're benefiting from the cost reductions on the expenditure side. We're still benefiting from the same revenue on the revenue side for 2 years. In the 3rd year, it drops by 1/3 down to 67%. In year 4, it drops by 2/3. And then at year 5, it's fully phased out. Okay. So here initially, there's no revenue benefit. In FY27, if the charter were stood up, there would be no revenue benefit to reduce, to offset the cost increases. But as time goes on, I'll have a chart on the next slide. We'll see that the cost increases will be offset by benefits of higher revenue. And this is kind of a summary of everything right here. Hopefully this will make sense, and we'll spend as much time as we need to make sure it does. So FY27, top line, we have the charter allocation, $3.78 million. The savings from reduced classroom teachers at our area schools, $1 million. No revenue increase benefit because, again, we're still in the hold harmless in FY27. And then, Ms. Julian, this is starting to get at your question, I believe. There, I also have the enrollment numbers in the top line, the light blue shaded row. So in year 2, the anticipation is enrollment will climb to 374. So you notice that the charter allocation goes up by an amount because of that increased enrollment. The teacher savings of $1 million. And then there in year 3, 1/3 of the hold harmless disappears. And so there's a benefit of increased revenue of $282,051. In FY29, the enrollment climbs to 396. The teacher savings actually goes up because we're able to save another teacher because of the higher enrollment numbers leaving the area schools. And then the revenue increase benefit climbs to 564 because now the hold harmless is only at 33%. 2/3 of it has disappeared. And then in FY30, the hold harmless disappears, the full $846,000 revenue benefit, but it's combined with a higher allocation amount because of the higher enrollment, and the teacher savings are the same. So you can see the bottom line total net cost impacts. And there in FY32, their enrollment has climbed to the peak that Ms. Julian referenced, the 468. And there is the higher allocation by about $1 million, just shy of $1 million increase there. Teacher savings of 1.268 million, and then the revenue increase of 826,000. Total impact to the district, $2.66 million. And that, based on assumptions. Now, it's interesting to note the charter allocation numbers are very, very, like, I would bet money they're extremely low, because what was one of the big drivers of the charter allocation amount, it's BSA. So I did some quick math. What if the BSA increased another $700 like it did this year? What if it goes up? You know, I would venture to guess the BSA is going to be higher in 2032 than it is today. It only increases that charter allocation amount. So $700, quick math, was about $460,000 higher allocation for a charter of this size. $460,000 more if the BSA were to rise by $700. A lot of numbers. Basically, the cost to the district settles, and that's a perpetual number at that point, $2.66 million going forward, but likely higher, as I just mentioned.
Any questions for Mr. DeGraw? Mr. Dorn?
On that slide 32, just that revenue increase is to whom? the district or the,
to the school district.
and that's based on, I don't understand what that's based on.
That is based on having the additional Pearl Creek Charter School in our funding formula. That generates additional revenue, just having another school listed in the list
Okay.
because of the school
That's the
size.
school size.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. So it doesn't have anything to do with enrollment.
No, that's a good point. That can be, I was just going to say that. It's the school size factor, but every single school, regardless of their size, the first 30 kids, for example, have a massive, huge multiplier, gargantuan multiplier. Then from 31 to, and I'm not quoting these numbers exact, but that's how the funding formula, even our biggest school, the first 30 kids are funded at a huge multiplier, and then it goes down a little bit, the next chunk, and it goes down. Eventually, the large schools, a new kid that goes in there, it like actually has a negative multiplier. It's less than a one, but that's why.
Ms. Julian?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. DeGraw. So what you've put forward here differs very greatly than what we saw last week from the Pearl Creek APC when they talked about the overall cost to the district. Are you able to speak a little bit to specifically the parts of their slides and that presentation that you point to as being inaccurate?
Yeah, I trying to decide how much in detail to go into here. What I'll say here to start with is there was not an accurate starting point. So in my analysis of their slides, to me it looked like there was a starting point of $2.15 million of new expenditures. But the problem with that slide, and it was, I don't know the number that the slide was, it was titled Impacts on Expenditures. The expenditures that the group listed out aren't even costs to the district. So that's why I stressed the point earlier that it's very key to acknowledge that the cost to the district is the allocation we're required by state law to provide them. And there was no acknowledgement of that in the charter presentation. They had it in their budget at the very beginning of their financial section. There were kind of an overall budget there, and they were acknowledging that we provided them the revenue numbers that they would receive from us. Again, we provided them the exact sheet that's in the packet, but then they failed to acknowledge that when generated an analysis of the impact to the school district, which I don't know how to explain that. And the $2.15 million sheet, again, there's an additional teacher cost and additional facility costs. The district has nothing to do with charter expenditures on a regular basis. We provide the charter, the allocation, the revenue, and then the APC has full authority within certain limitations. They have to stay within district policy, has authority to determine how they allocate their budget at their APC level, at their school level. So the analysis didn't start from the right place, and then certainly the retained funds sheet that they had with certain numbers were definitely not accurate. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into there, but they certainly were not an accurate picture of the cost impact to the school district. And if board members would like, I can go item by item at some point, but I'll wait for those questions to come. But suffice it to say, the assessment of the impacts of the district of the charter group were far from accurate for many reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Julian. Mr. Doran, back to you.
Okay. On slide 31, could you explain a little bit more the hold harmless provision? And I'm particularly interested in, we've benefited from 1 year, and it's over a 5-year projection. Do we have to pay that back if that building because it's no longer, do we lose that hold harmless, and what's the cost on that? If it's,
Yeah. So we've crossed several bridges in this process that have never been crossed before. I'll lead with that. We've tried to get information from the state, and quite honestly, again, I think there's situations to where certain answers aren't necessarily known because that bridge has never been crossed. My estimated guess is that we wouldn't lose, we wouldn't have money taken back away from us, that we would simply, if the school were to stand up, it would be a net neutral, zero impact, because the school exists per the hold harmless at this point. If the school was stood back up, if they said the school would reappear in our funding formula. And so it would be a wash literally for FY27, because FY27 is treating us 100%. The school still exists. If the school really did exist, it would be the same scenario that would play out. So, but
follow up?
yeah.
Follow up, Mr. Dorn?
Okay, so let's say FY28, in essence, we're given 2/3 of, I'm going to say it's $100,000. So we get 66,000 approximately. But in the, so on slide 32, we get a revenue increase because of school size, site allocation, but that would be somewhat offset by what we were anticipating with the hold harmless.
Are you saying if the charter stood up was?
Yes.
So the revenue increase in 28, and I'm looking at slide 32 now, that revenue savings would jump to the 846, 153. So if the charter did exist, it would reduce the cost by somewhere in the, doing quick math, is that 500 and something $1,000, 560.
So FY28, we have a revenue increase showing of 282.
Mhm.
But on slide 31 under hold harmless, we get 2/3 of whatever. So they're crossing that out, I think. So our revenue increase actually goes down by the hold harmless removal.
So there's a net, without looking at the hold harmless, there would, if a new charter stands up, let's say we're not in the hold harmless, just to try to make the point and have an example. If we're not in a hold harmless, we haven't closed the school, we stand up a charter, we would, of this size, we would immediately get an $846,000 revenue bump.
Okay, I'm confused where you're getting 846. That's FY30.
The top line in 31. So that's the value of a new 352 student charter regarding revenue increase to the district. So we don't see that immediate benefit because we're in the hold harmless. We've already closed the school, so we're already realizing that benefit in revenue, but that benefit slowly disappears, which is why it starts to appear as a revenue benefit when looking at the charter impact to costs.
Okay, after the hold harmless. Okay.
That, yes.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions from Mr. DeGraw on this? Seeing none, go ahead, Mr. DeGraw.
All right. So the benefit of additional enrollment, there's been lots of talk about generating new student enrollment at the district. I took a few minutes to analyze that. And there's been different numbers, 39, 35, 30. In the end, before I jump into these numbers, I would just want to say the district would never use these numbers to actually plan in a concrete manner the prospect of potential new students somewhere in the future. But certainly we wanted to analyze the financial impact and put numbers forward to the public. So an additional 30 students generated from the charter would generate approximately $250,000 in additional revenue. Just anecdotally, there are 76 current out-of-district students on wait lists across the district in different schools of choice. 38 of those are kindergartners. I know the charter is talked about, I think it was the number 39 was talked about at their presentation last week. And so the question was about, well, would all 39 of those automatically be enrolled in the charter through the enrollment process? Not sure. So we ran a number at 30. And certainly if it was 35, it would increase that number a little bit. If you did rough math, you know, it's around $1,000, a little less than $1,000 a student. It's not linear in nature, but it would be, you know, $5,000 higher roughly. So again, 2 points to make. That level of revenue increase doesn't necessarily materially impact the large cost to the district on slide 32. And then the district, again, administration would never count on those types of numbers to plan fiscally with. The impact to the FY27 budget. So we have established a very preliminary, excuse me, a very preliminary FY27 deficit with a range of $0 to $5 million. If things fall in our favor, which they don't necessarily always do, but if enough things do fall in our favor, I'm pleased to state publicly that our deficit could be around 0, again, depending on a number of different factors, and it'll be a little bit of a time before we know that, but also could be as high as $5 million if a lot of big levers don't necessarily go our way. It's very important to note that that $0 to $5 million range does not include any impacts, potential impacts from our upcoming negotiations with our bargaining units, and it does not include any impacts of the possibility, the prospect of a new charter school being stood up. And that assumes a 6,660 BSA. So a summary of the fiscal content that we've just covered. The total net fiscal cost would be approximately $2,765,000 to the district in year 1, and then would fluctuate per the numbers on slide 32. Just for context, a $2.8 million number that equates to exactly 2 students across the district. So that would be an investment would decrease students in every class district-wide by 2 students. A cut of that size would generate a class size increase of 2 students district-wide. Most district costs around the district are fixed in nature and would not decrease with the standing up of a new charter. Variable staff savings found in classroom teachers offset a portion of the initial cost, the charter allocation, and then potential new enrollment is minimal in our estimation. And that concludes the fiscal section of our presentation. Next, we'll jump to transportation. So just a brief review of transportation laws, rules, and regs and policies. So regarding charters, the district provides transportation to charter schools on a space available basis, and this is in board policy. Currently, no transportation is provided to charter schools or any of our schools of choice. Most recently, we have provided some limited service to Discovery Peak Charter, F.E. Cochran schools just in the last couple of years, but the recent pressure on our driver levels have negated that ability. The district is not required to establish dedicated routes for a new charter school. Charters cannot opt out of our district-wide policy to independently access state transportation funding directly from the district, and all of these items align with policy 14-09010. The definition of space available in our policy is twofold. First, it's physical space in the actual buses, so available seats, but then it also, the second level of that is availability of routing certain routes of buses within the limitations of our current driver levels. So students, if we are, in the event that we are able to provide transportation, what it would look like is students getting on their regular neighborhood bus, riding to the anchor school of that route, and then getting on a shuttle from that school to their charter school. So one of the more recent ones that I mentioned, Discovery Peak, students, for example, in North Pole Elementary's attendance area would get on their local bus, would ride to North Pole Elementary, and then there would be a shuttle there that would drive them to Discovery Peak Charter School. So for operational context and precedent, that scenario that I just described oftentimes, and I believe it did cause Discovery Peak to slightly adjust their start and end times, because it takes a little bit longer for those students to arrive at their charter school as opposed to the arrival time of the neighborhood school. There have been historically many partial accommodations, meaning the district was only able to provide morning service but not afternoon service, or vice versa. And then, yeah, future transportation feasibility for Pearl Creek would depend on route capacity, timing, and district resources, which, as I mentioned, at this time, we're unable to provide any services to our schools of choice. And then a summary there is we're following our space available basis measurement underboard policy as dictated in 1409010. We would not be required to establish specific routes. We would not be required to provide direct transportation funding to the charter. And then the availability of service to the charter would depend on resources which at this time are not available. And now we will jump to additional considerations. Back to Ms. Gillum.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. We'll talk about some other considerations for you as a board to take into account. One other note I did want to make about transportation is that, as you know, Mr. DeGraw said, it would be for attendance area schools, so not every student across the district wouldn't be able to benefit from that. It would just be at those attendance area schools that we were able to offer shuttles to. And I do believe that's how it's worked in the past as well. So we did just want to provide some additional considerations for you, in terms of the board has done a lot of difficult work in the past few years, as Mr. DeGraw mentioned, closing 7 schools, looking at budget sustainability. We'll talk about enrollment decline that we've seen over the past many years, and then also just some other notes of future planning, perhaps. Nutrition services, this came up last week, and we did share information with the APC when we met in February around nutrition services. So while there is no additional cost to the charter school for the food that is provided through the National School Lunch Program, there is the requirement of the school to provide staff and appropriate storage and preparation spaces for meals. So participation in the National School Lunch Program does follow a rigorous regulation process. And so it requires that all nutrition services staff have a high level of training, that they're certified, and that schools have to follow those strict protocols and requirements. There is the option of only providing a cold pack lunch that many of our charter schools do follow. So in terms of that, only requires cold storage, no heating equipment. And Mr. DeGraw estimated that the cost of nutrition services staff would be approximately $30,000. I do believe perhaps there was discussion too, or information shared from the APC, that perhaps all of their administrative staff could be trained in this, but we would state that there would need to be one person who was able to oversee that, and it is a high level, or it is a training process to become trained in that. I did the wrong slides. This one, impact to school capacities. We looked at this information a lot last year, and so we did just want to come back to it, because with the closure of 3 elementary schools last year, this shows what our current capacities are. So we were able to increase our school capacities to an average of 70% this year. If you recall, last year that was lower, and one of our goals of school consolidation was to bring that greater level of efficiency across our schools. The next table shows what a projected impact of a new charter school, specifically Pearl Creek Steam Charter, could potentially do to the capacity of those schools. And again, this would only be for next year. These would be our estimates for next year's capacity impacts. If there was an increase over the following years to get to that higher level of enrollment of 122 more students, that would of course have another additional impact on the capacity of those schools. It would 61% would be the average next year capacity. This slide looks at enrollment over time. So I believe last year we shared through the school consolidation process that in the past, years we've seen a significant decrease in enrollment. We have also, in that same course of time, as Mr. DeGrom mentioned, provided many different schools of choice or programs of choice in our district. The orange dots on this graph correlate with the different openings of charter schools, the different openings of programs, and just to kind of highlight and identify where throughout the timeline of our district enrollment we have seen increases in choice, but not necessarily correlating increases in enrollment. Specifically, we wanted to highlight, as Mr. DeGraw said, he's experienced 2 charter schools opening, so specifically 2 K-8 charter schools that opened in recent years. So we just wanted to look a little bit closer at those 2 charter schools opening and impacts on enrollment. I just wanted to share, as we've seen recently a steep decline in enrollment too, just wanted to note that Dr. Ellis Ott is currently in our 20-day count, but he has also been reviewing when students leave our district, where are they leaving? And so last year when he was for this year, when he looked at students who left our district, of the students who left our district from the end of last year to the beginning of this year, 56% of those students, over 500 of those students, moved out of state. 22% of those students did go to a different homeschool. I believe it was 233 students of the students that left our district went to a different homeschool. So certainly we are seeing different changes in our population, but the greatest number of loss that we've seen is students, families moving out of state. The other piece that he noted this year is that in terms of the variance between our projections and what we saw during the 10-day count, our greatest loss of students was in our primary grades of elementary school. That's where we're seeing the greatest decline of student enrollment. One note that we wanted to make as well is that this proposed charter school is much larger than any of the charter schools we currently have in our district. So our largest charter school right now is Boreal Sun with 201 students, Chinook with 158, Discovery Peak with 193, Effie Cochran 144, and Watershed with 199. So this charter school would be 75 to 150% larger than any of our other district charters, and it would have a proportionally greater impact on the district. One other note that we want to make for you is district-wide staffing impacts. So through school consolidation, we've worked as a district to really try and stabilize our staffing needs. And so opening a new charter school would result in a net increase of staffing needs across the district as we continue to face staffing shortages, both in teachers and classified staff, and especially in specialized areas. Outside of special education, elementary is also one of the areas where we've had the greatest need and the greatest difficulty recruiting teachers. So we would, as Mr. DeGraw noted, even though the teachers do follow the students, there would be additional teachers and fixed support staff that would have to be hired in order to operate a new charter school, and our recruitment efforts would then also need to expand. And next, I will turn it over to Ms. LaPlante.
Thank you. Got to wake up my voice here. Thank you so much. It is exciting to consider what an investment in the school district would look like. Of course, okay, sorry. Sorry. I'm not used to being the quiet one. So it is exciting to consider what an investment in our district would look like. And as an intellectual exercise, imagining that is kind of exciting. So I would like to suggest that if we are looking at investing in our district, we consider some of the things that our community has been quite spoken about and wanting for our students. First and foremost, expressly lower class sizes. So for the similar investment that the charter school is proposing, we could lower class sizes across all of our schools by 2 students per classroom, which is a significant improvement for the number of students that are, having access to their teacher. The other thing that we could be doing, and it's in our strategic plan, we're already exploring it, and it really comes at no cost to the district, would be to take some of our current neighborhood schools and focus schools there, strengthen some of the things that they're doing, infuse them with STEAM, the science, technology, reading, engineering, art, and mathematics that we understand our students are interested in, our teachers want to do, our families are interested in. So there wouldn't have to be a new school in order to do this. We can do this and take many of the things that we already want to do and do them at existing schools. That could happen at one school, it could happen at more schools. Other schools could choose different focuses to strengthen. And while there would be a choice available because we can expand the ability for families to choose the out of attendance area option. We have gotten in the last few years better at looking at how students are moving from one school to another in our district. And I think that there's a way for us to accept out of attendance area students in the spring instead of waiting into the fall, which has been the traditional elementary practice. And I think opening up that in the spring would truly make it easier for families to make that as a choice and then figure out, because transportation would not be available, but they would have the time to figure that out. So I think that really does open up that as a choice, and we can infuse that in our neighborhood schools. Additionally, again, if we are considering investments, I propose that we could look at bringing things back that we have lost over the years. We've had to face some very difficult decisions, and we have, trying to avoid school closure, we have actually chipped away at some of the other things that we have loved in our schools. If we are making an investment back in our district, I would consider bringing back things that we have lost, like the art programs, our instrumental music programs, and our ELP programs. Those are all things that we have had to either lose entirely in the elementary schools or reduce to such a minimum that it is not as effective as it could be. So I propose that we could, I think, bring in 12 teachers, 4 to be stream coaches, and 4 to be band and 4 to be orchestra teachers. And they would focus primarily on our 12 in-town neighborhood schools. And we would work with them to provide band and orchestra on a regular basis at all those elementary schools, focusing on 4th and 5th grade students. So if the 4th and 5th grade students in those schools chose either band or orchestra, that would be a total number of students impacted by 1,440 students if they all chose that. And 3rd through 5th grade students would get the stream coaches doing lessons. I think they would have upwards of 9 lessons with 2 components to each lesson happening throughout the course of the year. Those teachers would follow a similar model that we have had in the past for our art teachers, where they developed kits that they demonstrated for the teachers, and then teachers learned how to do those kits in their classrooms and continue doing those over the course of the year. So it actually it's a coaching component for the teachers. It demonstrates high quality instruction for them in areas that maybe they haven't been able to explore themselves. They get to work directly with students. They develop those kits, and then that becomes part of what we have in the teaching and learning department for people to check out. So that was a highly effective model. I think that model could be re-examined to be a stream coaching model, both working directly with kids, and it wouldn't be targeted only at ELP kids, although that would be a primary target, but all students in the classroom would benefit. So that's a total of 2,185 students that would benefit from that opportunity. So breaking that down by the numbers, that's an investment of 12 teachers, which comes at a cost to the district of $1.5 million. And based on just the numbers that I shared, that's an investment of about $686 per student. So I guess I would end by, I don't know if you want me to end or not, but if we consider the strategic plan that we put forth, you know, we did a lot of important work last year. Last year, we made some really tough decisions, and yet in the midst of that, we also looked ahead with hope. We looked at belonging and community and creativity and growth, and we thought, why are we making these hard decisions? We are making these hard decisions in the hope that in the future we will be able to invest back in our students, and I think that we have some ways that we could do that.
All right, thank you, Ms. LaPlante. Before we go to questions from the board, we will take a brief recess. Let's be back here at 7 o'clock, so 5 minutes. All right, we are back from recess, and I want to thank the administration for their presentation. And now we will open it up for questions from the board. Since we have Miss Julian all the way somewhere in Iceland, I think, we will go to her first. Miss Julian, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, it's early morning here, so um, I wanted to talk a little bit about the, i- and I feel like I was very pleased. Thank you so much for bringing forth the idea of expanding STEAM education or STREAM education throughout the district. Because as we know, the really only revenue driver that we have leverage over is to attract students back to our district, and we have close to 20% of K-12 students in the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District attend out of district homeschool. So whether we attract them back to BEST or attract them to a school within our district, that's a huge priority for this board, and I know that that is a priority for this board. I also want to acknowledge that the charter is it also has those goals in mind. However, I appreciate the administration for probing their assumptions, which I think really helped me as a board member understand a little bit more about how can we get to that increased enrollment. So I was going to ask a little bit for Ms. LaPont or Dr. Meinert to talk a little bit more about those investments, specifically the $1.5 million back into Stream, and how quickly could we stand something like that up?
Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Julian. I think that with enough notice, we could easily have something started by next year. We have lots of interest in bringing band and orchestra back to the elementary schools. We would obviously need to do some hiring to do that. And we also, I think, would have interest in teachers taking on positions as coaches. There might be a little bit of work to be done. So I don't know if in the first year all of those potential 18 lessons would happen. It might take a year or two to get to that total, but I definitely have already mapped out the rotation that I think would get us there. So with a little bit of lead time, absolutely, we can get this started next year.
Okay, and if I might, President Burnett, I have one more follow-up.
Yep, go ahead, Miss Julian.
Okay, so the maintenance costs, going back to section 5 on the presentation, and this was when we were discussing a lot of the questions around the maintenance cost, the lease, which of course we do not have in hand right now to review. My question is, we are looking at well, what has been proposed is a 468 student charter with a 5-year on-ramp, starting at 352 students, increasing to 468. I know that we have a lot of assumptions that are being made both from the Pearl Creek APC as well as the district. But I'm asking, is there a way to get a little bit more granular on what we think the actual costs may be, specifically around what would it cost to staff and maintain the the custodial needs of a school of 468 students? I didn't see where they had that budgeted, and I do think that it is there's a lot of gaps in that part of the budget, which if those costs increase, those costs will, and please correct me if I'm wrong, increase also the 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 financial burden to the district as a whole, or will negatively impact their ability to do some of the other things that they've budgeted for, which again, I see a lot of gaps that are reliant on
Mr. DeGraw.
volunteer hours.
Yeah, it's that second scenario you just played out, Miss Julian. So the impact to the district would be zero. So going back to my original comments of the one cost to the district is the charter allocation. And then after that, the district has very little to nothing to do with the actual day-to-day expenditures identified by the charter. The curriculum related, educational product related decisions that they make, again, staying within board policy or any exceptions that they have to board policy, that's the purview of the APC. But so the second scenario where I described it, it could negatively impact their vision and what they want to accomplish. Absolutely 100%, because in our estimation, the estimates they have in maintenance and operations are woefully inadequate. In some areas, they're basically making a $0 assumption for the assumption of the borough providing custodial services to the charter is highly irregular, and we've never seen or witnessed that anywhere else. So there's a lot there. It's safe to say, suffice to say, in the maintenance custodial operations area of their application, there are large gaps.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw.
If I can follow up, do you have an estimation of how much it costs to maintain that facility with custodial staff in previous years?
So on a regular ongoing basis, the Pearl Creek Elementary had 3 to 4 custodial positions building wide. That would include day and evening services. You know, at an estimated, if you have a staff member, our custodials average in the $75,000 to $80,000 per year cost wise. For context, most of our charters contract out their custodial services. The Effie Cochran at the Howard Luke building, they recently acquired services for about $75,000 annually, and that building is significantly smaller than the Pearl Creek building. So $75,000 a year custodial, evening custodial, not day custodian, evening custodial only for a building that's significantly smaller than Pearl Creek's.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
DeGraw.
thank you so much. I'll hold my questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Julian. I'll put you back in the queue here. We will go to Mr. Burgess, and then we have Ms. Carol Hubbard.
So, kind of sticking on this theme for a moment, if I can remember what it is that I specifically wanted to ask. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to pass it to Miss Carol Hubbard.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Mr. Burgess. Ms. Carol Hubbard?
Thank you. I have a question about the lottery. I guess it was termed a tiered preferential system instead of kind of a lottery. And I just wrote down that there's a legal issue with that. Is that something that would need to be ironed out before we are even able to approve, as that's their whole admission process? It seems like a pretty big hurdle right out of the chute.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Loa. We certainly wouldn't recommend approving the charter application with the way that the lottery and admissions process is currently written. We've had conversations with the APC about our concerns dating back to February, and very little has changed. And so it would not be our recommendation for the board to approve the charter as it's existently written within their application.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carol Hubbard. We will go to Mr. Doran.
Okay, thank you. Starting on slide 4 in the enrollment question, as I read the application, it actually, with the conversations around inspection, could range in enrollment from 352 to as high as 612, which is beyond the capacity of the classrooms that are, or ostensibly, if they stayed with the same PTR, there would not be enough classrooms for that. The information we just got gives some different scenarios where on different years they would have 2 kindergartens, other years they would have 3, and then some, whereas other grades would shift periodically throughout the time period. So one of my questions is, if we approve the charter, if we, and it's interesting, any way you calculate it, there are different numbers. You know, if we go to the 468 number, though it could be higher than that, depending on how you read their expansion plans. Does that's actually the size of the school, and they would be authorized to um, to go to 468 at any period within that, or as I said, actually, according to the calculation and expansion ideas that are involved, it could be 612. So I'm very concerned what we're actually authorizing the size of the school for.
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Gillum. That is also one of our concerns, is a lack of a clear plan in terms of what the enrollment will be and what expansion looks like. They've put multiple different plans within their application without a lot of clear direction in terms of where they're headed. And I think that's problematic for the board and the district to understand what the plan is, how that impacts the education at the school and the direction that they're going. We've experienced charters in the past where they have specific PTR increments within their charters, and then they come back to the board and say, hey, things have changed, the context has changed, and we would like to do a charter amendment. At that point in time, the board can consider that. But it wouldn't be our recommendation to approve the charter with the way it's currently written in terms of multiple different pathways and it not defined which way they want to go and how much they will expand to within the future.
And follow up to that point. And so if, for instance, it was approved, they were projecting to start with 352, they had 400 students apply, they would be able to automatically open at 400 or 450, whatever, based on what their charter application is saying.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Doran. I would say that the way that Alaska statute is written, such that it says that if more students apply than they were originally allotted for, I do think because they have the expansion plan in their charter that they would be able to accept more students. That would be certainly new territory for us that we would be going into. But I do believe that the way the statute language is and the way that their charter is, that they have expansion in the charter, that they would be able to potentially accept more students. I would also, if it's okay, note that one part of the uncertainty within these different, two parts of uncertainty for the expansion plan, that coming back, the idea of that coming back to the district every year to come up with a new plan creates certainly a level of uncertainty for the district in terms of planning. It creates a level of uncertainty for our budgets that we don't currently experience with charter schools when it's a set enrollment, in terms of if they're going to add another class, that then has an impact at our neighborhood schools. So that would certainly be something we'd want to consider. And I'll also note that you identified in here that there is in the middle school expansion plan, it changes how many classes there are at each grade level. So that would also put a layer of uncertainty for the students enrolled at the charter if there wasn't going to be enough space for them as they rose from, say, 4th grade to 5th grade. That would be another level of uncertainty in a situation that we would need to deal with that we haven't had to deal with before.
I might a related question.
Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Okay, going to slide 44, that appreciate putting in when different charter schools and magnets and special programs came in. I think you had indicated that it was a decrease in enrollment, but I'm thinking that that decrease may or may not be related to the charter, but and it's an enrollment issue. But what we can see from experience is that we have not seen opening a charter did not increase, or magnet, because I think in this case, magnet definitely applies as well, uh, which when Barnett was opened, it was specifically to attract out of district and homeschools students into our district. It did not have that thing. So counting on attracting people out of district or out of homeschools, our experience does not support that increase to the district. And actually, in most cases, there was a decrease that was probably not due to the charter. I think, those students were, for the most part, already in the district. They transferred over. So am I?
Well said, Mr. Doran. The other reason we also put it there is we've heard this board and other boards past haven't been open to choice and different options within the district. And so we wanted to, again, highlight all the options and choice that the district has invested in over time. And yet we still see a decline in enrollment historically. And so thanks for noting what you noted, and then additionally wanted to make sure that people had an idea of all of the choice options that currently reside within the district.
Thank you, and you put me back in.
Mr. DeGraw.
And just quickly, one more note to that enrollment decline. One thing that we didn't mention earlier is our kindergarten class that came in was significantly smaller than in years past. So in addition to the other demographic issues that are going on, it's also a lower birth rate that is in play, as well as to the outflow and homeschool and all the other factors that are in play, but a significantly lower birth rate over time as well.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. We will go to Ms. Maple.
I have 5 very unrelated questions, so I'll start with one and just
You got it.
I'll be back in. My first one, I don't know if the right person to answer this is here. And regrettably, I didn't ask it at the presentation last week, but and maybe somebody else did and I missed it, so tell me if that's the case. But one of the line items that gave me pause in the budget we're looking at is classroom furniture. In my line of work, we look at outside of what is built in putting a school together, given it's talking about pre-K, not elementary, it's $30,000 to $50,000 per room to outfit a classroom and appropriate furniture. And the budget for all classroom furniture is $108,000. And I know that it's not listed in here, but I heard that would be offset by surplus. But I'm curious if anybody is able to elaborate on whether or not seems to be a viable number, what that surplus process would look like, and if we actually think surplus furniture could refurnish that building.
So we're not going to be able, I'm not going to be able to speak specifically and answer directly your question. However, at a high level, there will be the availability of some surplus furniture, but not nearly enough to equip the entire school. And then I would wholeheartedly agree with your assessment of the dollar amount that has been included, that caught our eye as well, as not adequate. So our assessment at a high level at this point is that they have not planned adequately for furnishing the building, to include the amount of surplus furniture that might be available at some point.
Ms. Maple.
Move on to another one. For looking at the lottery, I know the overarching, the 2 big things that stand out to me is that what level of involvement the actual district staff would have, and that some of the information it seems the APC wants to use to determine to rank students' eligibility is confidential information. And I'm just curious, if the district staff were relied on to run the lottery, if that were changed in the APC's application, would it allow for some of that information that otherwise would not be available to the APC to be considered? If the district is running it, would some of that data about whatever we settled on, whether it's free and reduced lunch, et cetera, be able to be considered if it was totally run by the district?
Thank you, Ms. Maple, for the question. Certainly that data does exist within our system. If terms of students are eligible for migrant education services or if they're qualified for free and reduced lunch. So it is available, and I do believe that there would be some way that we could collate that data to have it to inform the process. Yes.
I'm going to jump in real quick first because I do have a question that actually was kind of in relation to her first question. Um, so it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this probably would be to Ms. Gillum or Mr. DeGraw. Charter schools purchase even their own computers and iPads, assistive technology, instructional materials, instructional technology, all of that, correct?
Yes, that is correct, President Burnett.
I don't see a budget inside this charter school application that is sufficient for those things. Would that be correct?
Looking at their budget right now, they have $40,000 currently budgeted for technology supplies, which I do believe would be intended to include all teacher laptops, which I think we estimate at about some amount of thousands of dollars. Chromebooks, which I think are $300 approximately per student, and then I would have to pull up those specific numbers. So there isn't anything specific in the application. I don't believe that speaks to what type of technology they would intend to consistently have available for students. Certainly, we do have charter schools that don't rely on any technology as part of their charter, so that could be part of it. But then, yes, I would say to your point, $40,000 would be a low estimate for covering all of that technology. And Mr. DeGraw, I believe, also has feedback.
Yeah, and not enough to do, I think, what the charter envisions doing.
Thank you. Kate, we will jump back in. Miss Maple, we will come back to you. I have Miss Julian up next.
Oh, thank you so much. You can, I can yield to Miss Maple. Thank you.
Okay, Miss Maple, you have another question.
Looking back at the transportation conversation, I know that. So I certainly didn't understand prior to this what we're actually talking about when we're talking about the space available basis, specifically that it's not like if I live on Farmers Loop, it's not picking my kid up on Farmers Loop and dropping them off at Auburn Drive. It's picking them up on Farmers Loop and then taking them to wherever we're actually districted for, and then the shuttle piece. And so when I asked at the last meeting about concerns about these ways that we would collaborate, that we're collaborating on transportation, that then costs us money. A, what does the cost of a shuttle look like to move kids back and forth between schools? And B, who foots the bill theoretically for a shuttle?
I'll jump in before Mr. DeGraw. He can get to the numbers. I think it's important to note that we don't provide any transportation for our charter schools right now. There is interest in the district providing transportation for charter schools, but we're not at a point to even provide that. And so I want that to be clear that shuttles don't currently exist. They did at one point in time when we were in a very different scenario in terms of the budgets for our transportation and the drivers that we had. Now to your questions in terms of what that would cost if we got to this ideal world where we did have more drivers and space availability, Mr. DeGraw could speak to that.
Yeah, any cost would be borne by the charter. It would be billed at an hourly rate. And yeah, I'll just say I think there's significant misunderstanding of what resources the charter could acquire, up to, I think, somewhat of a belief that the district would be required to send the transportation money to the charter, which is patently false. So, and certainly, I think there's an inaccurate expectation that there'd be a scenario, as you described, Ms. Maple, that a district would be running its regular U Park route and would veer out of its normal path and go to Auburn Drive, and that's not the case.
Thank you.
Could I just raise a point of order?
Mr. Dorn, your point of order?
That we avoid using of the term false. I mean, something might be misunderstood or inaccurate or things of that sort, but I think that term casts some, implies perhaps some ill intent, but
Okay, thank you,
that
Mr.
we
Dorn.
to avoid that.
Thank you, Mr. Dorn. We've got Mr. Burgess, then Miss Carol Hubbard, and then Mr. Dorn. Go ahead, Mr. Burgess.
Okay, I want to. I have several questions, so of course I'm going to ask one or two, and then we'll put me back in. But but I guess I wanted to start with something that came up last week to get some clarity, because there was discussion about, you know, being the APC was willing to change things in their application, not married to anything, that sort of thing. And I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that this application is supposed to be the final plan for the school. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's certainly correct, that when they submit the application, that is their final plan. As we discussed last week, there could be minor adjustments within that process if the board wanted to consider those. But there has been conversations back and forth between the administration and the APC, and the charter that is in front of you today is actually drastically different than, you know, the first charter that was submitted, and that was based on conversations and feedback that district administration did provide to the APC and things that they were willing to work on and change. But it truly is, if there were any substantial changes made, in my mind, and then talking to our legal counsel, that would restart a 60-day process if a new application came forward.
Okay, thank you. And if I may follow up, with that in mind, and as Mr. Doran referenced earlier, there's kind of multiple options described in this. So I'm curious, how binding, if this were to be approved, how binding is the language in the application to the operations of the school?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Burgess. So similar to, as Dr. Minot referenced before, if a school is going to make a change to that charter application, and I'll also look to Ms. Beam in case she wants to amend anything that I say, that amendment to the application would need to come before the board again for approval, and then would have to go back through the approval process with the state. Is there anything else that I'm missing in that, Ms. Beam?
No, we just need to keep in mind that if it does change after it's approved and it changes the programming, which a lot of these changes seem to be changing programming, then it has to go back to the state for their final approval. And that is a 90-day period. That's not something that can be done, you know, next month.
So just to summarize, I guess what I'm hearing is that if this were to be approved, any changes that were subsequently made, say between now and when the school is scheduled to open, would require additional time from the district and the board, as well as the state board.
Yes, that is correct.
That's correct. And I think it's important to know that the board at that point in time, once you approve the charter, you could not force those changes. So if there were things that you wanted to see changed between approval and the start of the school year, if you approve it, there's no going back in terms of, well, I wanted this also to be included in the application. And so I think it's important to get as much of what you want in the charter application up front. And then, of course, there can always be conversations down the road if the charter itself wants to make some changes to their charter.
Okay, thank you. Put me back in the queue.
You got it. Miss Carol Hubbard. Oh, sorry, Miss Beam.
And I just want to add a final, we have to have the final approved application by the beginning of December. And I mean like the 1st or 2nd of December, because we have to have time to get it to the state to go through their processes on their end. And usually it's in their March meeting that it goes through for when they vote for yes or no.
Thank you, Miss Beam. Miss Carol Hubbard.
Thank you. As Mrs. Maple was looking at the budget from the charter school, I wanted to kind of review a couple of things because I had some questions on, and I don't know, I guess I didn't get to ask all of my questions the other night either. Um, as Mr. DeGraw mentioned that he would be willing to go line by line. I don't know if we were talking about like comparing line by line, but as we're looking at the second page of the charter application or the charter budget, I'm sorry. Um, as Ms. Maple pointed out, the classroom furniture is like 110, and if we average 30,000 for 16 rooms, that's like $480,000. So we're almost off there by $400,000. And I guess my question would be, how close are these numbers, say, for curriculum and like the technology supplies are clearly off by about half. Um, so that would be my first question and maybe that's for Mr. Beam, curriculum wise. Um, and then I wanted to point out that as I was crunching these numbers, I did notice that on page 1, the total salaries and benefits number doesn't include the principal's.
Miss Carol Hubbard, could you give the page number to where you're at?
I'm sorry, I'm on the Pearl Creek Steam Charter budget. And I'm on page 2 looking at, well, I was on page 2 looking at.
We got it. Thank you, Miss Carol Hubbard. Continue.
Thank you. Okay. And so I'm still on their budget, and I just wanted to point out before I send it to Mr. Beam that on their budget, they did not include the principal's salary. So their number at the bottom of page 1 of their budget says $3,083,000, and it's missing $192,000 right there. So between all these small things, I think we're adding up to a pretty monumental group of, I don't know, I guess errors or just miscalculations. So maybe Mr. Beam, if you want to address the cost for curriculum, that might be, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would say when we purchase elementary language arts and math materials, that generally runs about 125 between 125 and 150 per student. So then we would just have to kind of do the math on, and that's that's for language arts, and then you can double that for math. And then when you get to the middle school kids, you can triple that. You can actually go 6 times of that, because when they hit middle school, then it's math, language arts, science, social studies. So at least 4. And then if there are electives or music or whatever the other classes will be, all those add up quite quickly.
Could I follow up?
Go ahead, Miss Carol Hubbard.
So when you're talking about middle school, sixth graders are middle schoolers.
Well, I guess in this case, 6th graders would still be considered elementary. But as we get older in grades 4, 5, 6, we do tend to start looking at social studies books, science books. So then those costs add up
Okay.
quickly. And also keep in mind is that many programs today, you have that initial cost, and then everything comes back around again 5 or 6 years later, because there's this ongoing cost every year.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to crunch the numbers, so if you can put me back in the queue, please.
Thank you, Miss Carol Hubbard. We are going to go to Miss Julian, and then we will jump back into the rest of the board questions. Miss Julian?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to log off here soon, but I just wanted to address something that was brought forward last week, which was the question to the board of do we have what we need sufficiently now to move forward with the next step of discussing a recommendation, and I will speak to that. Maybe jumping forward a little bit, but only because I'm going to have to go here soon. I feel like we have. I thank the administration for what you've put forward. I also really want to thank the Pearl Creek APC for bringing forward a recommendation. The the amount of changes that I would need to see in this application to move forward with approving it from my own perspective are very substantial. And so as the charter application stands now, I have what I need to move forward with a vote. And I don't feel like we need to have another, I would not be in favor of another work session at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Julian. Do you have anything further from administration? I know that it's super early in the morning and you've been up literally all day and night. So if you have anything further for admin, go ahead.
No, at this time, everyone else has asked questions and they've sufficiently answered my questions by way of their presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Julian. Jumping back into it, we have Mr. Dorn. Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Okay. Let me go with facilities because we're kind of in that budget area. To get a better understanding, and as was brought to the table last week, that this would be a public entity lease, whether it's the district or the borough. At this point, it would definitely be the borough if they decide to do that. But in terms of the whether the $271,000 in the budget for a lease is realistic or not. And I went to what all the other schools are paying for their lease and utilities. In some cases, they may be paying the utilities themselves, but I put them all in the same thing. And I took Effie Cochrane as the example because that's a lease with the district, so it's a public entity lease. We're not looking to make a profit. And that's for this current year is $257,000 $10. That's a much smaller figure or much smaller building and footprint than the Pearl Creek building is. So I'm concerned about it only costing 12,000 more, or so 14,000 more to take care of all of the utilities and everything at that Pearl Creek building.
Yeah, Mr. Doran, that's certainly another concern of ours is, as we've demonstrated with the other charter schools, they're paying significantly more. And we haven't been privy to conversations with the borough in terms of what they might be offering, but it definitely seems under market value when you look at all of the other experiences for our charter schools. And then specifically Effie Cochrane, being in that public sphere, but being a much smaller school and facility, but at almost costing exactly what they have in their charter application, seems a bit unreasonable. And so that is an area that we feel like they would probably need to allocate more money to in the future, which again goes back to making different choices to potentially offset that cost.
Okay, follow up. So when you say to do that in the future, but it's supposed to be it needs to be part of the budget now. Is that
yes
our understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And when you mention the borough, what I'm very concerned about is we have no indication within the application that the borough is interested in leasing it. At what price? I'm very mindful of the fact that recently the assembly decided not to maintain Joy, and they were in negotiations with another charter school for leasing part of Joy, and they still decided not to do that. And whether we have some insights, since we've had the building and still do for the next month and a half, how sound the systems and the structure is, not deferred maintenance types of things, but soundness I have concerns on that. Uh, but then whether there's a realistic view of a leased build, right? Actually, they don't have a facility in the horizon.
Yeah, that's correct. They don't have a facility. They haven't brought that forward in terms of having a signed lease. Could a school operate within that building next year? I'm confident that it probably could, but again, I'm not sure that they've accounted for all the maintenance requirements that that building takes to keep it up and running every year. Ms. Carrion had provided us that $55,000 to $60,000 mark in terms of annual average maintenance, and that's about 300 trouble tickets a year that our maintenance staff here in the district was going over to that building just to make sure it was operational. And that would now fall to the borough. And so the borough would have to be committed to ensuring that they're doing that maintenance and, making sure that the building is operational for not a lot of money, presumably from the APC going to the borough. So those are all things that I think the board would want to see in terms of where that falls within a lease agreement from the APC to the borough.
Thank you. You put me back in.
Yes, Mr. Doran, I have you back in. Ms. Gillum.
Thank you, President Burnett. I was just going to make one notation based on a couple comments. Ms. Carol Hubbard, I believe when Mr. DeGraw said that he would go line by line on the budget, he was referring to the budget that we provided you today. And I did also want to note that on the second page of that budget, because subtracting lease costs or building costs from the overall allocation to a charter happens before we calculate the indirect rate. I'm looking at Mr. DeGraw, make sure I'm saying that correctly. So it does have in there an initial estimate of what Mr. DeGraw estimated leasing the Pearl Creek building could cost. And so that estimate that is on that budget sheet is $454,387. So that's on page 2 of the budget sheet that you were provided today, which is the sheet that we provided to the APC.
Thank you, Ms. Gillum. Before we jump back into our board members, I have a couple of things that I have been writing down. First being volunteers. It's my understanding volunteers in our district must go through the extensive background check and the volunteer packet that we have. Does this apply to the charter school?
Yes, it does, Ms. President Burnett.
Thank you. When it comes to the building, the borough assembly still has to have that conversation. That is not a conversation that the mayor actually gets to decide. That's something that I do believe the borough assembly will have to decide on. And there is no decision there on whether or not that they are willing to partake in that or give the building over. We know that there have been issues with Joy. As mentioned, they did decide to close Joy. There was a charter school there that was interested in that. So that right there leaves a big hole in this application because as it stands, if we were to approve this next week, there is no school for them to go to. There is no building. So that presents a huge problem for me. Then I have some issues with this tiered preferential system that they have going on with enrollment. I guess I don't really have a question. I just kind of wanted to make a few statements. I really feel that this is not a choice for all students. And when we look at wanting to add an addition, when we look at wanting to add a school, it should be something that is for all students, something that is a choice for all families. All families should be able to access this should they want to. That is a huge push behind this option for choice, but I do not see this being a choice for all. What I see this being is a choice for the families of that community, possibly grandchildren of that community, and then maybe if there's room, then the rest of all. And I really, truly am having issues with that. And I would like to see that worked on because this should be a choice for all. And then I guess I'm also have the volunteer piece I fall back on. When it comes to, I wrote down a few notes over here. Music teachers and things like that. It's my understanding music teachers cannot be volunteers. We need to actually have certified staff in those positions, or am I wrong with that? I guess that would be my question there.
I guess it depends upon how the program is being offered. That would be my reflection on that. I do believe in their budget, they do have budgeted for a music teacher specifically. I'd have to go back and look.
I know I saw a lot of numbers. Yeah.
So I mean, I suppose it, everything depends in that sense of how it's being offered. If the intent is that it's meant to be offered in my mind, and I'm looking at Miss LaPlante, if that as a special course is intended to be offered to help provide the prep periods for the classroom teachers, then yes, we would be looking to have a certified teacher providing that instruction for students. And I would see if Miss LaPlante had anything else to add to that.
Yes, when we have teachers teaching a music class, they should be certified as music teachers. I want to be careful because we have teachers that are emergency certified, and so we have people who are working towards their certification while they're teaching music, but their intention, just like we have in other positions doing the same thing, is to become a certified music teacher. If a teacher plays music or does other things musically inclined in their classroom, that's wonderful and enriching, and we have lots of that as well. But to be actually teaching, they would be certified.
Right, correct. I guess my biggest point behind that is we're already struggling district-wide for those positions. And so I would assume that for a charter school, we would also have issues getting those positions. And if they are budgeting for them and promising them, then where does that go? Then it looks like, because what they talk a lot about is volunteers and input there. And so that just strikes, I don't know, something off key there. So just something else I would like looked at with this application. That's all I have for now. So I will jump back in. Miss Maple, we have you next.
Actually, you covered my question about volunteers, and Mr. Doran covered my question about facilities. And I would just like to echo what Ms. Julian said. I don't know if she's still on. That I agree that I have the information that I think that I need. So thank you for the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Miss Maple. Mr. Burgess?
Thank you. So I'm gonna go back to the I guess it's slide 4 of the administration's presentation, discussing PTR or class sizes, and noting that in some grades, in the higher grades, in the application, the PTR exceeds the state targets that were recently passed as part of HB 57. Now, I'm just thinking through the wording of that statute, and what it talks about is a target average class size. And so I'm wondering if some of their class sizes are targeted higher, but some are targeted lower, does that average out correctly, or is that still, I guess, hopefully you're following my question. The average across the school is lower. Does that matter according to the statute?
It does not. That's not my understanding of the reading of the statute, that it would be the individual classes themselves. The kind of exception there are some of your other classes like PE, where those could certainly be over the average target size, but in your individual classes or grade bands, it should not go above that. And if it does, then there should be a plan in terms of minimizing or reducing your class sizes and how they would need to get to those numbers.
Okay. Ask another?
Yeah, follow up, Mr. Burgess, or another one?
It's a different subject. Slide 5 in the administration's presentation. Just for clarity for both the board and the listening public, when we talk about the hiring process and collective bargaining and how we can't necessarily just assign teachers to schools because that teacher's interested, can I just hear a little bit more about how that process works?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Burgess. So the process, if you were to approve the charter school, They would identify the number of teachers that were needed, and we would post those positions through our internal and external processes. Positions posted prior to a date, July 1, I believe, retain internal preference or internal postings as opposed to external postings first. So they would be posted just like any other known vacancy within the district, and anyone within the district would be eligible to apply during the internal posting period. And then if it wasn't filled through that period, it would then be open external as well.
Thank you. And so I guess when it comes to assigning teachers to a specific school, that's just following that same process. And do teachers who have been around longer have more ability to choose an assignment, or?
No, how long a teacher has been in the district does not provide them any more seniority in applying for a position. It would have to be based on their qualifications, both provided in their application and then also discussed in their interview.
Okay, thanks. I could
More
keep
questions,
going.
Mr. Burgess? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you could do a couple more. We have Mr. Dorn. I know he's got a page and a half, so you go right on ahead.
Okay. So I'm gonna change gears a little bit here. Going back to last week's presentation, and Ms. Gray, this one might be for you. On slide 30 of the APC's presentation, they talk about equity and embracing STEAM through an Indigenous lens. And what came up in the meeting last week was things such as bringing elders into the classroom. They note on the slide volunteer and A&E, as well as language immersion and bus service from critical locations. They noted in the presentation that bus service would be potentially something that Migrant Ed could provide. So let's start there. How would that work? Is that a thing, and how does it work?
Migrant education currently does not provide bus services. We are a supplemental support. And so in terms of transportation on a case-by-case basis, we have provided gas cards or cabs to students and families who are in need, but not necessarily bus services.
Okay. All right. And then when it comes to, I know we have many examples in district schools of working with our various Native organizations to bring elders into the classroom. A couple things come in mind. Effie Cochran obviously has programs like that. I know Mr. Jesse Hensel, a teacher, has an elders program that he runs in coordination with FNA. Can you talk a little bit about how those kinds of programs work around the district, and how elders or other guest speakers or guest instructors might be compensated?
Okay, just focusing on the compensation specifically.
And logistics, just how that works, how those partnerships work.
Yes, so we have many different ways that we have elders in our schools and within our community. The first one is our Alaska room. We do have part-time staff who are elders. We call them cultural bearers in our Alaska room, and they are part-time employees, and they are staffed with the district. We also have an MOA with Danakanaga, where we do provide funding to their programming, and then schools or community members do reach out to Danakanaga and schedule some time with them and the elders if they would like to. And then we also work with different organizations like UIF, like during Indigenous Peoples Day. We do different collaborations, and they also support and compensate elders as well. There are many different schools who also build their own connections and get to know their families and reach out, and they have elders coming into their schools based off of their relationships. I think that's one of the most powerful ways to do so, because building connections and relationships and maintaining those relationships is a way not only to have elders in our classrooms, but to engage families. And so we have many different schools that have continuing relationships with elders, but then also cultural bearers. We have some staff in our Alaska room who are, I guess, relatives of elders as well and also work in our schools. And so we don't only have elders, but we also have other cultural bearers that are in our programming. And one of the things I'd like to point out is it has really spread district wide as well. So one of those things that we had a high need for, people were really asking about, was NYO. And so we partner with UAF and they have an NYO club. We have our own NYO program, and then we expanded out to elementary, and that was based off of the need and what we were hearing from our community as a whole. And then TCC has also helped support in different ways as well. And so when we're looking at working with our elders, it's truly working with our elders and all of our relatives and how we're coming together to build those relationships and look at those programmings district-wide.
Okay, thank you. So I think so. What I'm hearing is that there are a lot of different organizations involved in partnering with the district to make these programs possible, and they often will provide compensation to folks who will come into our schools.
Yes, and I think it's important to note too that not all elders want financial compensation, and so there are many elders that we work with who might want a beating kit or might need transportation or ask for a specific way to be provided, I guess, compensation. And so compensation doesn't only mean financial, getting a paycheck.
Thank you. That's great. Really cool to hear about all that stuff. By the way, and it's just take a moment to say that. I guess as a follow-up, and I don't know if administration will be able to answer this question or not, but it sounds like, in order for it to make all of this happen, it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of relationship building. Are we aware of any meetings between the Pearl Creek APC and any of these organizations, Danakanaga, FNA, ANE, UAF? I mean, you might not, I guess it's a weird question, but
Yeah, we're not aware.
you're not aware.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to jump into with Mr. Dorn. Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Okay. I'm going to start off with an observation that I think it's really interesting. Our conversation has similar bookends. Coming into this is brought up by a group of parents and community members who are trying to think what's good for kids and brainstorm with that in mind. The last few administrative slides is very similar. It's what's good for kids and what can we offer. I like the extension from STEAM to STREAM, and the only one I can think of is maybe go to STREAMS, so we get social studies in there. Yes, it's basically, as the acronym gets longer, it includes everything that we do in our curriculum. And so part of my observation and question is that the very first question to be completed on the state application is to state how the charter will specifically differ from other educational options. And that's one of the things that has struck me through this. And then the ongoing conversation, the references are often back to, well, we were doing this as Pearl Creek Elementary, partnering with the university. Some people on grants, some people elsewhere. And that's not anything different than many of our schools do currently or have those opportunities. Globe is in several of our schools. The One Tree, several of our schools. We all teach science. We all teach math. With that arts, we have music in all our schools. Maybe not band and orchestra, although it is fascinating. I was just at a school yesterday who was talking, they have 70 kids who are going to band orchestra at giving up their recesses to do that. And I know that's happening at other schools. It's just that specific example yesterday. So we all have music. The structure, when I look at the staffing, is the same basic structure. Having a music teacher, having a counselor, having a PE teacher, etc. So I am, I do have concerns in terms of how does it differ from others. And I'm going to address process here. So several people, I feel comfortable going ahead with a being on our agenda for next week's regular meeting and making a decision there. I am certainly open if we needed another work session to do that Monday evening. But in terms of moving ahead, and I look at it in terms of this is the application that we're dealing with. And arguably, we will get to, if it's turned down, it's a new application, which is after October 1. I'm just going to put that consideration out there. That doesn't determine if we say we need more time to talk about it, then we can give more time. We can work that out. But I am mindful of those types of things. The couple of questions that I do have, and Mr. Burgess and others have winnowed down my list, which is good. But I do have real concerns about the lottery priorities. I won't go into those too much. I think administration has highlighted the ones that are on my list of concerns. I've expressed those before. But I did want to confirm the comment during the presentation tonight, Ms. Gillum, I think you said, regarding the federal charter school guidance versus the state. If you're doing a charter school under federal funding, then the federal guidelines play. But if we're doing it under state funding, the state guidelines would play. Am I correct?
You're correct in that the state statutes supersede the recommendations in the document before you. And it states that clearly multiple times in the document that it bows to state statutes. Really what that guidance is for is securing federal funding or federal grant funding for charter schools. But when they wrote that, they realized states also have various charter regulations and laws, and that state statutes supersede the regulations or the recommendations in that document.
Okay, thank you. That's how I understood that and read it. So thanks for that clarification. Going to administrative slide 25, and you give there some both current and projected enrollments. It brings to, 25 and then comes up later. I forget which other one. But my question that related to both of those is when we talk about the number of schools, if we added one, the implications of 532 students leaving current schools, reducing that their enrollment, when we have just redistricted and impacting, I was trying to do a quick calculation in my head, but I would believe it would be somewhere around 1,000 students this year that have been changed. And so, feelings that, well, some students had to leave their school they've been at to make room for other students. So you reference redistribution, and I'm concerned about that's really redistricting and what that impact is to all 28, at least all the elementary schools. It's not just in one area. It's not just, it's again putting families through on a broad basis through disruption.
Mr. DeGraw?
Yeah, great point, Mr. Doran. The addition of a school next year would be a 180-degree reversal of the direction of the district the last few years, and there would be a high number of dominoes that would fall. You bring up one important one. Ms. Burnett brought up the staffing pressure it would put on the district. There's there's a dozen different unintended consequences, dominoes that would fall that would have not so great impacts on the district, on the organization as a whole, to include students and families in the case that you're bringing up there. So yeah, accurate point.
Dr. Minor?
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that if a charter were approved, that wouldn't necessarily automatically trigger a redistricting. We don't redistrict when charters are stood up, but it would certainly have an impact on our neighborhood schools. And as Mr. DeGraw said earlier, probably a large impact potentially on Anne Ween, University Park, and potentially Wood River being those West Side schools. And so as you would see the impacts there, then down the road, there may have to be redistricting or relooking at school closures depending on what enrollment does and what our distributions look like at those neighborhood schools.
And follow up on that, just clarification, it's not just our West Side schools, because in the redistricting we did, and to accommodate schools that were closed, students were shifted from the West Side to, like Anne Ween went to Ladd, U Park moved east. I mean, there were a lot of impacts on, so it is not just a West Side impact issue.
I would agree with that. When I was referencing the West Side, I was directly referencing the application and the students that have preferential treatment within their lottery and admissions process would certainly be from the west side of town currently. But to your point, the entire borough was impacted by redistricting in a major way this last year. And so it does have that impact when you're adding another school into the district, those unintended consequences in terms of what that looks like down the road for those existing neighborhood schools.
Thank you, Dr. Minor. Mr. Doran, I'm putting you back in the queue. Ms. Carol Hubbard.
Thank you. I mainly just wanted to say that I appreciate everybody's work. I mean, everybody here has brought a piece to the table, and I'm grateful for that because you all have made it very clear. And I appreciate the board's questions because I think I pretty much have all my questions answered. I came in with questions about the lottery, about SPED, about volunteers and facility costs and nutrition and transportation, and you and everybody has hit everything. And the preparation from the administration has been phenomenal, so thank you for that. And I also want to thank Ms. LaPlante for a little ray of sunshine. I appreciate that. I'm kind of looking forward to budget season, maybe. I'm hoping that if we still can hold our own, maybe we can bring 12 teachers on and bring band and orchestra and stream coaches. I think that would be phenomenal for us to invest in our own schools. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carol Hubbard. Any other questions from board members? Mr. Doran, did you add a couple left? Mr. Burgess, did you have a couple left? We'll let Mr. Burgess go first. If you don't have any, it's okay too.
Well, I could hit on enrollment a little bit more because, and so really it's more of a, I'm not sure that this is a question, I guess, but I want to kind of just make sure that I'm clear on the information. There are claims that enrollment might increase, but we looked at past adding schools of choice in the past and saw that that does not typically results in a district-wide increase in enrollment. We have some numbers that are being kicked around of Pearl Creek APC, I think, said that they expect to attract something in the range of 50 some odd, 50 to 60 out-of-district students. And then we see that and then they say, even if that's not the case and they only get 35%, or sorry, 35 students, 10%. So that there's a couple different numbers being thrown out there, I guess, in terms of increasing enrollment from out-of-district student. None of it seems to be enough to actually offset the costs, even if we saw that increase of 59, I think, students. But it also isn't clear to me that that's realistic based on the lottery and the number. Based on the, thank you, Ms. Carol Hubbard, for letting me trade mics with you. Based on the, see, now I've lost my train of thought. So 59 students is kind of the maximum that they suggested, I believe. That's still not enough to offset the costs entirely. So it doesn't, I guess it's not adding up to me, this claim that they'll be able to attract to the district. Thank you. Oh, is that? Okay. Okay. Thank you, tech support. All right. We apparently need to learn more about these mics. But the okay, so I was at the 59 students not being able to offset. Also looking at the number of out-of-district students currently signed up on wait lists for charter schools. It was, I think, I know exactly what it was, 76 students, and half of them, precisely half, 38, are kindergarten students, which means in order to meet those numbers based on that list, we would have to see basically all of those students, all of those kindergarten students enroll in Pearl Creek, which I think the numbers wouldn't add up if we're prioritizing the way that they have it worked out here, although it might for kindergarten. So I guess I'm just trying to make sense of this claim that this school will significantly increase enrollment and help to solve district's problems. I'm not even sure that I captured all of my concerns there, but it does seem it seems like a lot of claims being made that would be very difficult to actually see in reality.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Doran, did you have any further questions?
Yes, a couple that my high list. If the administration could give us a handle on the 4% that we can have, basically the district gets for services provided. That's not extra to the district, it's for paying for services. And ostensibly, that is not income to the district because we would, we're doing services for extra schools that we would not otherwise be doing. So my question on that is, what we currently provide to as services to charter schools, does the 4% that we get from each of those schools, does that cover those services, or how much above that are we providing?
I think that's a great question, and that's something that we're digging into here as a district. To specifically answer your question, no, it doesn't come anywhere close in terms of the services the district provides charter schools. At the legislative level last year, there was conversations about raising it to 8%. 8% gets in the ballpark, but I still don't think that necessarily matches, the services that we do provide. So when you think about the district, it provides the charter schools with IT support, HR support, payroll support, special education support, administrative support, which comes through the assistant superintendent's office, Ms. Beam, myself, Mr. DeGraw's support. So if you look around this table, there's a number of different supports that come from these departments that far exceeds that 4% that we're able to hold back as a district. And so I am hopeful in the future that there's additional conversations at the state level in terms of right sizing what that percentage would be, because there are fixed costs that the district has to provide all of our schools. And as you mentioned, when you add another school, that provides that makes additional burdens for our district in terms of the services that they now have to provide, with probably the same amount of staff to provide those services.
And then just to add to those thoughts, I think, and it's a good endeavor to look at raising from 4% to 8%, increase those overhead costs that districts can subtract. However, as the board has seen, the estimated financial impact to the district, increasing that percentage will never offset the actual cost to the district. And that's because the district is in a static to actually declining enrollment situation. And it goes against financial good practice to be adding schools when our revenue's declining due to declining enrollment. So while it's a good endeavor to increase that 4% to some higher level, that will never solve the problem of the financial constraints of adding a school in a declining enrollment environment.
Okay. So related to this follow-up on this specific one, if we take the lower estimate of 8%, that's what the legislature would do, and we might be 9 or 10% or something, but let's just use 8%. But we're stuck with 4, okay? If in budget constraints, we needed to say, we will provide the level of services that we get reimbursed for, that we get paid for. So we might have to reduce the level of services for all our charter schools to that what 4% will buy.
Yeah, we've had those conversations internally, and I'm not sure that we could get to a point where charter schools could still operate if we did that. And so I think it's a great question, to administration and to the state in general. If the state really wants to see charter schools flourish, there needs to be a different funding mechanism for charter schools than what's currently available.
Okay, thank you.
And to your point, Mr. Doran, the district has made great lengths to this point. If you were to compare what the district provided charters 10 years ago compared to today, we have made strides towards getting closer to, we're nowhere near the 4%, but getting closer to it.
All right.
So.
Okay, and I'm not suggesting that but if we get into budget and we want to do some of the investments that are listed at the end of this presentation, we might have to look at some things there. The other one on the financial side was local contribution. I know in the calculation, it's 50% beyond the minimum. Is that our option, or is that a requirement by state law?
That is not a requirement. That's our option.
Our local option?
Yeah, historically, if you go back to pre-2010, the district provided 0% of that excess amount, and we moved to 50%. So that's at the purview of the district.
Okay, and your calculation is based on a per student. Okay, so as we get into budget conversations and what implications would be there, because I know in a budget, sometimes we've given X amount and sometimes we've been a little bit more and sometimes less, whatever, depending on what our deficit is looking like. My concern is that we don't get funded in local contribution on a per student basis. So there is no per student share or calculation per se. And the borough provides money to our total budget rather than to per students or such. So it's a little bit, I'm not advocating for change, except that in recent years, we've had some real conversations as a board and sometimes said, charter schools are hurting us as much as the district because state wasn't coming through. And so we shared what we had, and I think there's that part of collaboration is good. But I wanted to make sure that this is a local choice. It's not a requirement, and then make it clear there is no per student. They give a lump sum for us to be able to operate as a district.
Yeah, just can I?
Go ahead.
And just that is 100% accurate what you just said, Mr. Doran. I'll take it a step further, open possibly a hornet's nest here. You've been a champion of educating the public, including at the last budget committee meeting, that the district does not receive the minimum required local contribution. Why? Because the state subtracts it off of our foundation funding. We do not subtract the prorated minimum local contribution amount from charter schools. They receive 100% of the required minimum local contribution. So to the point of it's a local decision how the funding is established, because it's not a per student amount given by the borough, the district would have latitude to look at that funding amount and make decisions related to it. So it's an important point. The district, to your point, and it's accurate, the district does not receive, in essence, the required minimum because it's subtracted off of our state funding. We don't subtract the prorated amount of the required local contribution from our charter schools here in Fairbanks. So in that sense, they're receiving a greater amount relative to the district. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. Anything further, Mr. Doran?
I do have a few more, but I'm getting to the end. Okay.
Is there anything else from other board members? Okay, Mr. Doran, if you could go ahead and finish up with your questions.
Okay. On slide 32, I want to understand those teacher savings line. I understand the savings potentially for 1 year, but I don't understand how that continues and increases in savings, because at that, beyond the 1 year where we have those two going, your calculation, I understand that, but then it's very dependent on our district-wide enrollment and at individual schools, and therefore we really don't realize a savings over multiple. There's a point where the savings disappear because they're not even in the calculation. I think that's a misnomer on here.
Well, it's comparing again the scenario A versus scenario B. If at any point in any of these years the charter disappeared and any students at the charter went back to the district would have added costs to provide teachers for those students in the neighborhood schools. So the reason why it stays is because it's each year comparing without the charter versus with the charter. That's why the savings continue each year.
Okay, if I might, and let me make the observation, I don't want to make it a debate on that, but, and you can think about how to help my understanding. With that, if the charter closed, and they need to understand this is a 10, 20, 30-year commitment, because it's a 10-year charter. So the expectation is they're going to do that, and typically is that those number of teachers and actually their target PTR is not out of line with what was in the presentation. If we looked at investing in our district and actually it's crossed my mind, what if we started our budget calculations on the state targets and then built from there and what we could afford and what we can't give up and all those types of things. But with this in mind, that it's actually a wash coming back. So it's not a savings is why I'm looking at that is it's not a continuous savings. But you can think about it and see how you'd explain it to me to better understand. So So I just want to get into a debate. We could be here too long.
Yes, yes, we can, Mr. Doran.
Okay. Um, Another question I have is, and it does come up with the question of waivers, as was noted, the waivers listed in the potential charter or contract, different from the charter. And I'd like to actually see what the charter says. But asking for waivers, they're not updated, and there's no explanation, and they may or may not relate to actual policies that we are now, that are current policies, and we don't know anything about FEAS or FPA waivers to those contracts. But I'm mindful going from there as well. The last several years, there's been a major effort by the State School Boards Association, by several districts, including our districts and our charter schools, to get current updated trainings so that they are in compliance with practice. There hasn't been a lot of change in the state law since the charter law was passed, I believe, around 96, 97. And Chinook in our district was the very first in the state, the pioneer on that. But as we've gone, there were several things that charters have looked at to make sure that they are in accord with the understandings in the state rules. And they've done, elections, for instance. And I didn't really see a clear understanding of that in the bylaws. I may have missed it or misread it. But I know that was a major issue for several of our existing charters, that they would that they had to adjust their election process and meeting process to meet Open Meetings Act and those types of things. So my question is, do you have any indication that backs up in supporting this application that says that they're on board with an understanding of what those developments have been?
I do not believe we have had any conversations relating to that at all. In the first 3 applications they submitted, there weren't any waivers requested at all. So this application was the first application that included waivers. And I believe I noted the waivers are only in the contract. There's no reference to the requested waivers at all in the application. And I know Ms. Beam has facilitated with charter schools and charter school APCs over the past few years trainings with AASB that I believe has been very helpful in that process. So while I can acknowledge that we haven't engaged in any conversations with them around that, and I don't know if they've explored any trainings at all about that, it is certainly a continuing and ongoing support that we offer for our charter schools.
So follow up, I guess. I'm sorry, did you have something?
Nothing additionally. I think there's a lot of unknowns to the question that you posed.
Okay, because that's one of the things that as I was looking for, there are boilerplate aspects, which all of us have used at different times for applying for things or, and such. But I do know that that has been very dynamic conversations, and that each of our current charter schools have done serious reflection and adjustments in accord with those understandings, especially as questions have come up particularly from charter schools in other districts who have kind of pushed the boundaries and they've gotten some clarifications. And I know the State School Boards Association has done a lot of work, and I believe they do have a charter school pamphlet, at least in draft form. I think it came out, but okay. Question again, just so I have an understanding, the reference in the state application to an admin policy manual, and I know I'm not concerned about the uh, my question is not about the various references, but um, does the admin policy manual fit in accord with what the state expects? And I'm sorry, it was the last time I looked at this was 7 years ago. So I don't know how we've handled that, but does that meet the definition of the state's expectation for an admin manual versus a parent student handbook?
I will acknowledge, Mr. Doran, that I'm not 100% sure. And I will also acknowledge that this is my first charter school application that I've worked through. So when I went back in previous applications that were submitted, it did look like what was included in that appendix was a comprehensive parent student family handbook. So I do believe that it follows at least past practice and what we've seen charter schools submit as that appendix.
Thank you. And in terms of admissions, founding, um, what's the understanding on that being a founding member, and it goes into the lottery priorities as well. They define it as having 40 volunteer hours, and I'm not exactly sure how practice has been. Who gets in on the first go? I mean, in terms of those who have been working on this, making sure they, if parents and staff have really been working, what does that mean to be a founding member? But also, if you become a founding member by volunteering 40 hours, if this opened, we could have hundreds of families being founding members. And could you get all 40 of those hours out of the volunteer bank? And I'm just thinking again, access down the line for an open type of lottery.
I believe, Mr. Doran, you're based upon how I read the lottery information regarding founding members, those would have to be 40 hours that were completed prior to the opening of the school. So in terms of I don't believe that those 40 hours would be applicable to the volunteer bank concept that's later on. The way that I'm reading it is it's an individual with at least 40 hours of volunteer time invested during the founding of Pearl Creek Steam Charter. The initial development until the first instructional day of the first year of operation.
Okay, thank you. And
Mr. Dorn, are you
I
close?
think, yeah, I'm just
Okay.
I'm just and trying to take some things off. So I think okay. Actually, I think that's got the bulk of my questions that I really needed. It's great. Thank you very much for your patience.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have more, please email administration, and that goes to the rest of the board too. If you have questions throughout the week, please make sure you email administration so that we can get those answers before next week. Is there anything else from any board members at this time? Mr. Dorn?
Just, I know we'll probably adjourn before we really get to comments, and I do want to note appreciation to the Pearl Creek Charter Group for sending some responses to our questions from last Monday. That was also helpful going into here, and for all the work the administration did in providing your information points.
Yes, thank you very much, administration, for all the work you have done. Okay, seeing nothing further from board members, with that, we are adjourned. Have a great night, everyone.